For a very long time, teachers in the contemplative traditions have carried a simple picture from one generation to the next. Imagine a small hermitage near the sea, set where the pines give way to stone and the stone gives way to open water. Its door is never barred. A lamp burns on the porch through every season, and anyone who arrives there after a hard journey is received by the same quiet truth. It is never delivered with force. No one argues for it. No one tries to impress you with it. It is offered like a warm bowl placed in your hands after dark. The truth is this: what you keep chasing may not be ahead of you at all. You may already be standing in the place you were trying to reach. We are going to spend this time turning that over together, not like a puzzle to solve, but like a stone in the hand, felt from many sides. If you like, you can notice the hour where you are, the light in your room, the season outside your window, the simple fact that you are here. The path we are stepping onto tonight could be called many things. You could call it letting go. You could call it release. You could call it the end of unnecessary struggle. But perhaps the kindest name for it is this: nothing to fix. Not because life never asks anything of us. It does. Not because effort is bad. It is not. But because there is a kind of peace that does not come from driving harder, improving faster, or finally getting every detail under control. There is a quiet that appears when the hands unclench. There is a rest that begins when we stop arguing with the moment we are in. So take one slow breath. Or do not. Let your shoulders be where they are. Let your face soften if it wants to. We are not trying to produce anything special here. We are only making room to notice what has been easy to miss. There is an old way of understanding life that says much of what matters grows best when it is not crowded. Dawn does not need to be dragged over the horizon. The tide does not need to be persuaded to return. A field does not become green because someone stands at its edge commanding every blade to rise. There are forces in life that respond to care and attention, yes, but there are other forces that open only when pressure is taken away. We know this more intimately than we admit. Sleep will not come because we glare at the ceiling and demand it. Ease in a relationship rarely appears because one more explanation is forced into the air. A shaken heart does not settle because it is ordered to calm down immediately. Some things bloom when they are given space. Most of us were trained in the arts of pushing. From childhood onward, we learned to try harder, reach sooner, improve faster, prove more. We learned how to solve, arrange, optimize, correct. These are useful abilities. They build homes, feed families, heal wounds, mend roads, compose music, and keep promises. Nothing in this evening is a rejection of honest effort, but there is another wisdom that many people forget because the world does not praise it loudly. It is the wisdom of ripening, the wisdom of waiting without collapsing, the wisdom of tending conditions and then stepping back, the wisdom of allowing life to complete a process we cannot complete by force. Let me begin with a story. In a valley known for its herbs and wildflowers, there lived a woman who kept bees. Her hives sat on a slope above a patchwork of lavender, thyme, and small white blossoms that opened in late spring. For many years, the rhythm had been dependable. Winter arrived, held the hills in its silence, and then loosened. The soil warmed, the flowers rose, the bees found their way out into the color. But one year the cold would not leave. Morning after morning the ground stayed hard, the stems stayed dull, and the woman who tended the hives grew more and more uneasy. She walked the edge of her fields before dawn, with a shawl around her shoulders, bending to inspect buds that had not yet opened. She crouched beside the plants, touching their leaves as if fingertips could coax them toward summer. Her bees had begun to stir with the longer light, but there was almost nothing for them to gather. She worried about the honey. She worried about the hives. She worried about the season itself, as if a whole year might fail because spring had come late to her particular hillside. An old shepherd from farther up the valley saw her out there several mornings in a row. He had spent his life walking the ridgelines with sheep and weather, and there was a slowness in him that made other people speak more quietly when they were near him. One morning he stopped, and asked her why she looked so burdened. She answered at once, "The flowers should be here by now. The bees need them. Everything is behind. I keep thinking there must be something I can do." The old shepherd glanced over the grey rose, the sealed buds, the pale breath of morning in the air. Then he said, "There are things you can do. You can keep the hives sheltered from wind. You can make sure there is water nearby. You can watch for signs of frost, but you cannot pull summer up through the roots with worry." She frowned, because the answer felt too small for the size of her fear. That evening she went home and made a list anyway. She considered moving the hives. She considered covering the field at night. She considered cutting back the stems harder, then feeding the soil differently, then praying in a way that sounded suspiciously like bargaining. In bed she planned and revised and planned again. She was a capable woman. She was used to doing something. The next morning she woke before sunrise and stepped outside with all her ideas still crowded in her head. The air had changed. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The cold edge had gone out of it. The breeze that moved across her face was soft, carrying a faint sweetness she had not smelled for months. She stood still. Then she hurried toward the field. In the first light she saw it. Not a whole hillside transformed. Not a sudden miracle draped across the valley. Just one small spike of lavender near the path, its color finely visible, its first tiny blossoms loosening into the morning. A few bees were already there, moving from petal to petal as if nothing had been delayed at all. She stopped beside that little stem and laughed once, quietly. All her plans from the night before felt strangely loud in the presence of that one simple fact. The season had not been ignoring her. It had not been broken. It had been preparing out of sight, in ways she could not rush and did not need to supervise. Over the next days the hillside changed for real. Purple spread through the rows. White flowers opened between the stones. The bees moved in widening circles over the land. And the woman, every time she felt herself starting to tighten again, remembered the shepherd's words. "Your care matters. Your tending matters." But there comes a point where no amount of pushing can take the place of timing. This is one of the hardest things for the restless heart to learn. We confuse delay with failure. We confuse stillness with nothing happening. We stand over our own lives the way that beekeeper stood over her cold field, inspecting, evaluating, worrying, asking why the color has not appeared yet. But life is doing more in the dark than we can see. The root does not announce its work. The bud does not file reports. Growth is often invisible until suddenly it is not. Maybe there is something in your own life that feels like that unopened hillside, a conversation that has not softened yet, a decision that has not clarified, a part of you that seems dormant, tired, or shut down. Perhaps you have been leaning over it inwardly, checking every morning to see if it has changed. Perhaps your attention has become less like sunlight and more like pressure. If so, there is a gentle question worth asking. What is actually mine to do here? And what belongs to season, readiness, and time? That question matters because peace is not passivity. It is not indifference. It is not dropping everything and pretending nothing matters. It is knowing the difference between tending and forcing. It is knowing when to water and when to stop digging. It is knowing when to speak honestly and when one more sentence will only crowd the room. It is knowing when to sit beside what hurts without turning it instantly into a project. Tonight we are practicing that difference. We are setting down the habit of constant interference, if only for a little while. We are allowing the possibility that some part of life may know how to open on its own. There is another story that carries this same lesson from a different direction. In a mountain monastery known for its cedar trees, a young novice was given a simple task near the end of autumn. An older teacher handed him a handful of small cedar seeds and pointed to a stretch of soil beyond the kitchen wall. "Plant these," the teacher said. "Water them when the ground is dry. Protect the place from goats, and then leave it alone." The novice nodded, but inwardly he was pleased for a different reason. He thought of the grove that would someday rise there and imagined himself as the one who made it happen. He planted each seed with exaggerated care. He watered the plot with measured devotion. He checked the soil every morning, and because he was earnest, he also became impatient. Winter came, nothing showed. Snow fell and melted. Wind scraped the hills bare. The novice kept visiting the plot. He crouched by the place where the seeds lay hidden and tried to picture what was happening under the surface. He could not bear not knowing. Had the seeds split? Had they failed? Had he planted them too deep, or not deep enough, or too close together? He began to feel that uncertainty itself was a kind of torment. At last, one grey afternoon, he took a thin stick and gently scraped back the soil over one seed. He found it swollen and pale, beginning to open. Relieved, he covered it again. The next day he uncovered another. 2 days later he checked the first one again to see whether the small root had lengthened. Each time he told himself he was only being careful. Each time he disturbed what he most wanted to help. The old teacher noticed the loose earth and asked what he had been doing. The novice admitted everything. "I only wanted to make sure the seeds were growing," he said. "I wanted to know whether I had done it properly." The teacher bent down, touched the unsettled patch of dirt, and smiled with a sadness that was not unkind. "If you keep lifting a roof to see whether a child is sleeping, the child will never rest," he said. Roots need darkness the way lungs need air, not because darkness is magical, but because hidden things are easily damaged by too much interference. The novice flushed. "Then how will I know whether they are growing?" "You will know when they break the surface," the teacher said. "Until then, your knowing is not required." That answer irritated him at first. It sounded like dismissal. He wanted instructions, a system, a way to measure progress without hurting anything. What he received instead was an invitation into trust, and trust often feels like being asked to stand still with empty hands. Yet there was no other way, so he watered the plot when it needed water. He laid a woven screen nearby to keep the goats from wandering over, and each time the urge came to lift the soil again, he felt it, named it, and let the urge pass. Weeks went by. Then one morning in early spring he came outside and saw several green arcs breaking through the earth, tiny as bent needles catching the sun. He knelt there for a long time looking at them. The roots had been growing the whole while. His attention had not created them. His patience had only stopped damaging what was already underway. This is not only a lesson about gardens and monasteries. It is a lesson about the inner life. Many people move through their days as that novice moved over his plot of soil. They are forever checking on themselves. Am I better yet? Am I calmer? Am I more healed than last month? Am I finally becoming the kind of person I meant to become? They dig into every mood, every hesitation, every recurring ache, trying to measure invisible roots. But growth examined too aggressively is growth disturbed. We live in a culture that loves metrics. Steps walked, hours slept, messages answered, goals completed, income increased, progress tracked. There is nothing inherently wrong with measurement, but there are domains of life that resist being managed like spreadsheets. Love is one, grief is another, wisdom is another, the soft settling of the heart is another. There are transformations that happen only when they are not repeatedly dragged into the light for inspection. Think of how often you have looked at yourself with the gaze of an auditor rather than a friend. Perhaps you compare your timing to someone else's timing. Perhaps you look at another person blooming and assume nothing important is happening in your own soil. But you cannot see another person's winters. You cannot see the long underground labor that made their visible season possible. You cannot see your own hidden labor either, and that is part of the difficulty. We are asked to respect work we cannot directly watch. There is a quiet confidence that begins to grow when we stop making every inward movement prove itself immediately. It is not laziness. It is not blindness. It is more like changing the manner of our attention. Instead of prying, we tend. Instead of demanding evidence, we create good conditions. Instead of asking every day whether our life has become meaningful yet, we ask whether we are giving what is unfolding enough room to unfold. This matters with pain as much as with growth. Suppose there is an old sorrow in you, or an anxiety you know by name. or a restlessness that has accompanied you so long it feels like part of your furniture. The first impulse is often to fix, diagnose, untangle, solve. Sometimes that is useful. Sometimes wise action is needed, but often the mind keeps reopening a process that might have softened if left less disturbed. We prod the bruise to see whether it still hurts. We revisit the same memory to check whether it has lost its sting. We interpret the same tension from 12 angles and then wonder why it is still alive. We are lifting the soil again. A middle path exists here. It does not say do nothing ever. It says do what actually nourishes, then stop poking. Offer water, not interrogation. Offer shelter, not constant review. Offer consistency, not panic. The old teachers sometimes compared the mind to a pond after rain. When the surface has been churned by wind and runoff, it looks murky. If you are impatient, you might feel compelled to reach in and separate every suspended grain by hand. But of course that would only cloud it more. The pond clears by being left long enough for gravity to do its work. Clarity is not manufactured. It is revealed when disturbance lessens. Your mind is like that, more than you realize. Beneath the agitation, there is a capacity for settling. Beneath the noise, a native stillness. Beneath the swirl of interpretations, plans, rehearsals, and worries, there is an intelligence deeper than frantic thinking. It does not announce itself because it is not dramatic. It appears the way snow appears on a roof overnight, the way dusk enters a room, the way a child falls asleep while no one is watching. Perhaps even now, if you listen carefully inwardly, you can feel a layer beneath the busier parts. Thoughts may still be moving, sensations may still be shifting, but under that there is something broader, quieter, more patient. It has not been absent. It has simply been covered. A person who begins to trust this process changes in recognizable ways, not all at once, and not in some theatrical manner, but there is a reduction of strain. The face softens, the speech grows less urgent. Decisions become cleaner because fewer are driven by panic. Rest becomes possible because not every problem is dragged into bed. There is warmth without grasping, seriousness without heaviness. Such a person is not someone who has mastered every circumstance. They are someone who has stopped fighting the hidden rhythm by which life often heals and ripens. You may have met people like this. They do not necessarily know more than everyone else. Often they know less in the superficial sense. What they possess is not an inventory of answers, but a trust in process. They can plant and wait. They can love without clamping down. They can sit beside uncertainty without turning it into violence. They have learned that not every unopened thing is a malfunction. So if there is something in you tonight that feels unfinished, do not hurry to declare it a failure. If there is something in you that has not yet broken the surface, do not assume the seed is dead. You may be in the most necessary part of the growing, the part nobody can applaud because nobody can see it. For now, let the soil stay closed. Let the roots do their quiet work. Let what is beneath the surface remain beneath the surface until it is ready for light. Now let us bring this down from orchards and monastery gardens into ordinary life, because this teaching is not only for sages and farmers. It is for anyone who has ever tried too hard to make peace happen on command. It is for the person lying awake, calculating hours, and negotiating with sleep as if sleep were a reluctant official who might stamp the right paper if sufficiently pressured. It is for the person trying to repair love by speaking one more persuasive sentence into an already crowded room. It is for the person who cannot stop revisiting an old hurt, not because they enjoy pain, but because they are convinced one more turn of thought will finally free them from it. We all know what it is to press where gentleness is needed. The irony is almost painful. The more force we apply in these domains, the less available the thing itself becomes. Sleep retreats from being chased. Ease in the body flees the command to relax immediately. Joy thins when we stare at it and ask whether it is real enough to last. Confidence evaporates when every movement is monitored for signs of failure. In some areas of life, effort produces results. In others, Effort is like standing in a doorway, blocking the very guest you are waiting for. There is an old image I return to often when thinking about this. Somewhere in the countryside, a family keeps a small lamp burning overnight in the room of a child. The child sleeps not because the room is brightly commanded into safety, but because enough conditions are quiet enough for sleep to descend by itself. There is a bed, there is warmth, there is a sense of being held. Then sleep comes in its own hour. That is how many tender states arrive. We prepare the room. We do not drag them across the threshold. Let me tell you another story. A man once found a nest in the low branches of a pear tree behind his house. It was spring, and inside the nest were 4 speckled eggs. Every morning he passed by on his way to the shed and looked up at them with interest. He began to feel invested in the tiny lives inside. When at last he saw the first shell crack, he was delighted. He returned several times that day. One chick had already emerged, wet and awkward, with its eyes closed. Another egg showed a thin line where the shell had begun to split. He watched it quiver. He watched the small beak strike from within and fall still again, then strike again and fall still again. The effort seemed enormous for such a tiny thing. He stood there a long time, troubled by how slow it was. The chick inside was obviously struggling. Surely, he thought, it would be kinder to help. After all, the opening was already started. He would only make it a little easier. So he reached up carefully, took the egg in one hand, and with the smallest pressure of his thumb, loosened the shell around the crack. A larger opening appeared. The chick slipped out almost at once into his palm, damp and fragile. For a moment he felt relieved. Then he noticed how weak it was. Its neck could barely lift. Its body sagged heavily against his skin. It was breathing, but with such faintness that his relief turned to dread. The next day the chick was still alive, but it did not move like the others. The ones that had fought their own way free seemed stronger, more responsive, more able to raise their heads and ask for food. The one he had helped remained behind them, as if something essential had been skipped. An old woman from the next property, who had raised birds all her life, told him what had happened. The pushing matters, she said. The struggle against the shell is not only an obstacle, it wakes the body. It strengthens what will need strength. You thought you were removing difficulty, but difficulty was part of the making. He felt ashamed, though the old woman did not speak to shame him. She saw that his mistake had come from tenderness. He wanted to reduce suffering. That impulse was not wrong. It was simply incomplete. Compassion without wisdom often reaches too quickly. This matters far beyond birds and nests. Many of us respond to discomfort in ourselves and others the way that man responded to the egg. We see struggle and assume intervention must always be mercy. Sometimes it is. Sometimes the right thing is immediate help, protection, medicine, refuge. But sometimes what looks like harm is actually the labor by which strength is forming. Sometimes the shell is not imprisonment. Sometimes it is the exact resistance required for emergence. Think of how often we rush to eliminate every trace of unease. A child feels frustrated, and we hurry to remove the challenge before resilience has a chance to appear. A friend sits in uncertainty, and we cover the silence with advice before their own clarity has had time to rise. We feel sadness in ourselves and reach instantly for distraction, analysis, stimulation, or productivity before the feeling has had a chance to move through in its own honest shape. We have become so accustomed to fixing that we forget the dignity of processes that need room. There is real courage in not interfering too soon. It takes steadiness to sit beside a difficulty and ask, is this damaging, or is this ripening? Is this a wound needing care, or a shell being opened from within? The answer is not always obvious. That is why wisdom matters as much as kindness. Wisdom does not harden the heart. It refines it. It teaches the heart when to hold, when to act, and when to trust. This applies to inner restlessness as well. Perhaps there is something in you tonight you wish would simply disappear. Maybe an anxiety, a grief, a confusion, a recurring ache of not enoughness. It is understandable to want it gone, But sometimes the demand that it vanish immediately adds a second suffering to the first. Now there is not only pain, there is also resistance to pain. Not only sadness, but war against sadness. Not only fear, but the shame of still being afraid. What if, for a little while, you allowed the first layer without adding the second? What if you let the weather pass through without declaring every cloud a personal failure? There is room in peace for difficulty. Peace is not the absence of every hard thing. Peace is the end of needless combat with what is already here. The middle path in this is subtle. We are not being asked to celebrate hardship or cling to suffering as though pain were inherently noble. We are not being asked to romanticize every difficulty. We are being asked to stop assuming that pressure is the universal answer. Sometimes the question is not, how do I crack this open faster? Sometimes the question is, can I stay present without tearing at the shell? There is relief in that question. It relieves us of the fantasy that every stage of life must be immediately legible and efficient. It permits awkward transitions, unclear seasons, unresolved evenings. It lets a person be unfinished without being condemned. It allows the heart to strengthen in the very motion of bearing what it bears. If you have ever watched dawn arrive slowly, you know the value of not interrupting a process simply because it is gradual. The sky does not apologize for taking its time. Light widens by degrees. So does understanding. So does trust. So does the body's return from strain. So does grief when it learns to live with itself in a new way. So does the soft re-entry of hope after a long dry spell. Perhaps you can feel even now how deeply this runs against our habits. We want immediate evidence. We want assurance that if we relax, nothing important will be lost. Yet over and over life shows us the opposite. The fruit sweetens without supervision. The tide turns without instruction. The child grows in sleep. The heart, when not constantly prodded, often finds its own path toward balance. There is something else hidden here too. When we stop interfering so compulsively, we begin to experience another kind of confidence. Not the brittle confidence that comes from controlling every outcome, but a warmer one. A confidence in the resilience of life itself. A confidence that says, I can offer good conditions. I can remain available. I can be honest, attentive, and kind. And after that, I do not have to grip so hard. There are processes larger than my management. That confidence is restful. It is the confidence of someone who has done what can be done and no longer spends the night trying to hatch the dawn. So let us loosen around this together. Is there some shell in your life you have been prying at? Some process you have not allowed to ripen? Some discomfort you keep classifying as error when it may also be formation? You do not have to answer decisively, only notice. Notice where the hand wants to rush in. Notice the ancient reflex to help by force. And perhaps, with gentleness, let the hand open. There is a person many of us know very well, whether or not we have ever given that person a name. It is the one inside us that cannot stop adjusting things. It notices friction and immediately reaches for tools. It hears someone we love in pain and begins drafting solutions before they have finished speaking. It senses discomfort in the chest and starts rummaging through memory, theory, explanation, strategy, trying to make the feeling go away by understanding it faster. That part of us is not evil. Often it has served us faithfully for years. It may even have helped us survive. But like every good worker, it also needs rest. A hand that never unclenches forgets how to receive. Let us sit for a while with a story about this. There was once a woman who carried a great deal of invisible tension in her body. By all appearances, her life was ordinary and competent. She kept appointments, remembered birthdays, paid bills on time, and was the sort of person others described as reliable. Yet inside, she lived with a constant underlying agitation, as if somewhere in her there were a small machine that never quite switched off. She read about calm. She listened to talks about calm. She tried breathing exercises, notebooks full of reflections, long walks, new routines, old routines done with more discipline. and conversations in which she explained her unrest with increasing sophistications. Sometimes these things helped briefly, then the same familiar unease returned. One afternoon she went to see an elder who lived in a modest house at the edge of town. People visited this elder not because he solved every problem, but because they left his porch feeling less tightly tied to them. He offered tea, listened carefully, and rarely seemed in a hurry to improve anyone. The woman sat down and spoke for a long time. She described the spinning in her mind. She described how even peaceful moments seemed to contain a low hum of searching, as if there were always one more thing to understand before she could truly rest. She told him about all the methods she had tried and how discouraging it was that the old pattern kept returning. The elder let her finish. Then he asked a question that seemed unrelated. "Have you ever had a splinter in your hand?" "Of course," she said. "And once you removed it, what happened?" "It healed." "Did you command it to heal?" "No." "Did you lecture the skin, persuade it, explain to it what to do next?" She laughed despite herself. "No." "The body knew," he said. "Once the thing lodged in it was gone, the body closed around the place in its own time." Then he leaned forward slightly. "But tell me, what happens if every hour you peel back the new skin to inspect whether healing is occurring?" She was quiet. "It stays open longer," she said. "Sometimes much longer," he answered. "Not because the body has forgotten how to mend, but because mending keeps getting interrupted." They sat with that. The woman stared into her cup. "You think I am interrupting my own healing?" "I think you may be touching the place too often," he said. "Each time discomfort appears, you hurry in to analyze it, argue with it, improve it, track it, solve it. Your attention is intense and skillful, but it is not always gentle. Some parts of you do not need more management. They need to be left undisturbed long enough to close." Those words landed in her with unusual force because they did not accuse. They named something she had been doing in good faith. She had assumed her constant examination was care. She had assumed vigilance was wisdom. It had not occurred to her that the very thing she called healing work might also be preventing healing from finishing. This is such an important distinction. There is a profound difference between meeting pain and manipulating it. Meeting pain says, "I see you. You are here. I will not abandon myself." Manipulating pain says, "You must change right now so I can finally stop feeling uncertain." The first is steadying. The second, though understandable, often keeps the wound active. Notice how often the mind turns experience into a project. Sadness appears, and instantly there is a meeting in the head about sadness. Anxiety appears, and within seconds the mind is constructing theories, checking symptoms, rehearsing consequences, arranging next steps. A difficult memory returns, and immediately the whole internal machinery spins up, determined to extract a final answer from an event that may not yield one. We call this working on ourselves. Sometimes it is simply staying busy around an open place. There is an old saying that trouble is multiplied by the hand that keeps kneading it. That may sound severe, but it is often true. The first pain may be unavoidable. Life includes loss, fear, confusion, and loneliness. But then we add commentary, resistance, self-judgment, endless review. We reopen the question each morning. We touch the edge each night. We ask why it is not gone yet, and in asking, keep it fresh. What would it mean then to leave some things alone? Not abandon them, not deny them, not stuff them into a dark corner and pretend they are gone. Leave them alone in the way one leaves a recovering ankle alone after giving it proper care. Leave them alone in the way one leaves bread to rise after kneading it enough. Leave them alone in the way one leaves a cut clean and covered so the body can do what the body has always known how to do. This is especially relevant for restlessness. Many people make war on their own unease, which only trains the body to associate discomfort with alarm. The moment a restless wave appears, the system reads danger, and the wave grows. But if restlessness is met more simply, "There you are, I feel you, you may pass through," the whole pattern begins to change. Not instantly, not spectacularly, but honestly. The elder told the woman one more thing before she left. The question is not always, what should I do next? Sometimes the wiser question is, what can I stop doing? That question has enormous mercy in it. It lowers the burden. It reminds us that peace may not always need to be constructed. Sometimes it is uncovered by subtraction. We stop rehearsing. We stop checking. We stop peeling back the skin. We stop insisting on immediate resolution. Then what remains has room to settle. Many of us are far better at intervention than at allowing. We know how to produce effort. We do not know how to trust the process. We can write plans, take notes, gather advice, watch ourselves with relentless precision. But can we sit by the doorway of our own experience without storming the room? Can we let a feeling be present without drafting a strategy against it? Can we let a question remain unanswered for a night? This is advanced tenderness, though it looks like very little from the outside. The Buddhist teachers spoke often about the suffering added by resistance. They did not say the first blow of life could always be avoided. They did say we have some choice about the blows that follow, the blows of self-criticism, panic, obsessive interpretation, and the exhausting insistence that we should be elsewhere by now. We cannot always prevent the original ache, but we can sometimes stop stabbing the place that already hurts. There is power in hearing that. It does not mean you must like discomfort. It means you need not make it your workshop. You can let an unsettled feeling be an unsettled feeling without building a whole identity around it. You can let a difficult day be a difficult day without concluding that your life is permanently off course. You can let a healing process be incomplete without cross-examining it every hour. Perhaps tonight there is some place in you that has been asking desperately to be left in peace, not ignored, not silenced, just spared the endless hands. Perhaps there is some thought loop that no longer deserves your fuel, some old pain that has had enough analysis, some inward taskmaster who could be told gently, thank you. You may clock out for the evening. Then what? Then very ordinary things. Breath continues. Night deepens. The body rests against what holds it. The heart, without being supervised, keeps time. The mind may still make weather for a while, but even weather tires. Sediment settles when the jar is no longer shaken. Skin closes when it is no longer picked apart. A person softens when they are no longer under constant internal inspection. Nothing dramatic may happen in that first evening of allowing. In fact, almost nothing may seem to happen at all. But do not mistake quiet for absence of change. Often the deepest repairs make very little noise. Let us turn now toward another aspect of this quiet teaching, because not everything that keeps us from peace is intensity. Sometimes what keeps us from peace is absence. We are not here. Our bodies sit in one place while our attention runs ahead into the next room, the next task, the next year, the next imagined version of life, where everything finally makes sense. And because attention is elsewhere, the life that is actually occurring goes strangely untouched. This habit is so common that we scarcely notice it. We drink tea while thinking about email. We hear a friend speaking while silently preparing our answer. We walk through the evening thinking about tomorrow's obligations. We lie down in bed and continue arranging, evaluating, correcting, remembering. Our lives are full, but our presence is thin. Then we wonder why even beautiful moments feel insubstantial. There is a simple line I have always loved. The song you are waiting for may already be singing. It captures something almost all of us have done. We have missed the living moment because we expected revelation to arrive dressed differently. Let me tell you a story about that. There was once a young man who heard rumors of a musician living in the high country beyond 3 ridges. People said this musician knew a melody unlike any other, one that could open the heart completely and reveal the secret of contentment. The young man, who had long felt that life was almost but not quite enough, became convinced he must hear it. He packed lightly and set out at dawn. The road first led through meadows where wild fennel grew along the edges and small yellow flowers turned their faces to the sun. Then it bent toward a river, quick and clear over stones. Then into a stand of birches where the wind moved through the leaves with a sound like soft applause. But the young man paid little attention. His mind was already on the far ridge, on the musician, on the promised melody that would finally answer whatever had remained unanswered in him. By midday he passed a woman sitting beside the path with a basket of apricots. She offered him one. He thanked her and shook his head because he did not want to lose time. "Are you in such a hurry?" she asked. "I am going to hear the great song," he said. "They say there is a musician in the mountains who knows it." The woman smiled and bit into an apricot. "It is a good day for listening," she said, but he was already moving on. That afternoon he crossed the river by stepping stones. The water flashed silver around his boots. Birds called from the reeds. Somewhere farther downstream, someone was laughing. He noticed almost none of it. Even beauty became background when measured against the thing he thought he was seeking. By evening he reached the lower slopes of the mountains. His legs ached. He slept poorly because anticipation kept him restless. The next day he climbed higher. The air cooled. Pines replaced birches. The path narrowed. Still he pressed on. Late on the second day he came to a small house with a porch facing a long stretch of valley. An older man sat there mending a simple instrument. No audience. No aura of mystery. No sign announcing the location of truth. Just an old man. A bench. A breeze. And the sound of distant water. The young man bowed and said, "I have come to hear the melody that reveals contentment." The old man looked at him for a while, then asked, "Tell me about the road that brought you here." The young man frowned. "There is little to tell. I walked." "What did you hear?" the old man asked. "I do not know," said the young man. "My mind was on arriving." "What did you see?" "The road, I suppose." "Did you taste the apricots by the path?" The young man stared. "How do you know about the apricots?" The old man smiled. "There is only one road to this porch." Then he set the instrument aside and said very quietly, "The melody you came to hear was playing for 2 days. It traveled beside you in leaves, water, birds, footsteps, wind, and the ordinary sounds of a world not resisting itself. But you could not hear it because you were waiting for it to take a more impressive form." The young man felt the truth of this before he could argue with it. At that moment the valley below seemed suddenly full of sound, not loud, not dramatic, just present. Water moving over stone, insects in the grasses, the dry click of pine branches shifting against each other, his own breath. The old man lifted the instrument, played a few simple notes, and then stopped. The valley continued the music without him. Most of us are this traveler more often than we know. We keep imagining a moment that will finally begin our real life. Once this project ends, once this relationship settles, once this city changes, once I am more healed, more admired, more secure, less afraid, less tired, more certain, then I will arrive. Then I will hear the music. Then I will begin to live. But by the time then comes, it has become now, and the habit of postponement simply attaches itself to some new horizon. The mind leans forward again, just a little farther, just a little more. Then contentment, then rest, then permission to be where I am. Yet meanwhile the apricot is sweet, the river is clear, the wind is already playing through the leaves. This forward-leaning hunger has been described in many ways. Craving is one word, restlessness is another, dissatisfaction is another. At its root, it is the belief that the moment before us cannot quite be enough, that something essential lives elsewhere. This belief is subtle. It hides in productivity, in self-improvement, in ambition, in fantasy, in comparison, in the inability to finish a meal without consulting tomorrow. And when it is active, even a beautiful life can feel like a hallway. To practice presence is not to abandon planning or forget the future exists. It is to stop granting the future exclusive rights to meaning. It is to say, this breath counts. This floor under my feet counts. This voice in the room counts. This hour counts, not because it is perfect, but because it is the only place life is currently taking place. There is a freshness available when we return this way. Some traditions call it beginner's mind. I think of it as the willingness to meet the familiar without flattening it into a label. We see a tree and say tree, then move on as if the word had exhausted the living thing. But the word has captured almost nothing. It has not captured the exact green of those leaves in this light, the scars in the bark, the way the branches answer wind, the insects moving where we do not look, the smell after rain, the long unrepeatable history inside that trunk. Naming is useful, but naming is often the beginning of not seeing. We do the same with people. We interact with our idea of them instead of the person before us now. We do it with places, jobs, relationships, and even with ourselves. I already know who I am, we think, and then live inside an outdated summary while actual life keeps changing under our feet. Presence asks for less certainty and more contact. If you want a simple practice, it is this: let one thing be real at a time. When you drink, drink. When you listen, listen. When you wash a cup, feel the cup. When you lie down, feel the fact of lying down. This sounds almost too plain to matter, which is precisely why many people overlook it. We expect transformation to arrive with complexity. Often it arrives through intimate attention to what is already here. A person eating while only eating is not doing something trivial. They are reclaiming their life from dispersion. A person sitting by a window and actually hearing rain is not wasting time. They are rejoining the world. A person who notices that their mind has wandered and softly returns to the room has performed a small act of homecoming. Not once, but every time. The traveler on the mountain road did eventually hear the old musician play, but what changed him most was not the instrument. It was the discovery that listening had been available before he reached the porch. The world had not withheld its song. He had withheld his attention. Maybe that lands somewhere tender in you tonight. Maybe there are meadows you have passed through without tasting, rivers crossed without hearing, evenings you have survived without inhabiting. If so, let there be no scolding in that realization, only tenderness. You are not late. The apricots are here now. The air is here now. The small, undeniable fact of this moment is here now. Presence is not a reward for the advanced. It is the simplest recovery available to any of us, anytime we remember to stop walking past our own lives. At the end of a long day, there is sometimes a tiny gap that most people barely notice. Tasks are finished. Messages have been answered or abandoned. The body is too tired to keep up the same internal momentum. And for a few moments, before sleep or the next wave of thought, there is a plain quiet. It arrives without announcement, no trumpet, no flash of insight, just a pause in the machinery. If you are attentive, you can feel how unforced it is. Nobody builds that piece by hand. It is what remains when spinning loses energy. This is worth contemplating because it reveals something kind about the mind. Agitation is costly. Worry requires fuel. Rumination requires attention. Mental rehearsal consumes energy. Resentment consumes energy. Catastrophe building consumes energy. We rarely speak of it this way, but these states are expensive. They keep a fire going all night by asking us for log after log. Peace, by contrast, is often simpler than we imagine. It is not always a grand state to be achieved after heroic discipline. Very often it is the condition that appears when we stop feeding the disturbance. There is a story about this from a riverside town. An older woman lived there alone after her children had grown and moved away. She was not a famous teacher, though many people sought her out because being near her made problems feel less inflated. She kept a clay kettle on the stove, tended a small herb patch, and had the peculiar gift of answering worry without becoming entangled in it. One autumn evening, a younger man came to her house, carrying the look of someone whose mind had been chewing on itself for months. His work troubled him. Money troubled him. His father's health troubled him. The future was a dark corridor in which every door seemed to open toward more demand. Even when nothing was wrong in the moment, he said, his mind kept manufacturing reasons not to rest. The woman listened, then poured tea. "Tell me," she asked, "does worrying feel effortless?" He almost laughed. "Effortless? It is exhausting." "Yes," she said. "People forget that. They think worry happens to them free of charge, but worry is labor. It costs breath, attention, muscle, sleep, and years. She pointed through the window toward the river, where evening light was catching slow currents around half-submerged stones. "Do you see those rocks?" she asked. He nodded. All day the water rushes around them. Branches strike them. Leaves collect against them. Mud passes. Foam passes. The river is always moving, but the stones do not have to try to be still. Stillness is what remains when the water is not pushing them elsewhere. She let that image sit for a while, then continued. A thought arrives, then another. Then fear gathers around them and says, "We must keep turning this over, or something terrible will be missed." So you carry the thought from room to room, from meal to meal, from daylight to bed, adding one more scenario, one more rehearsal, one more argument, one more prediction. Of course you are tired. You are hauling the river on your back. "What should I do then?" he asked. "Sometimes very little," she said. Notice the moment a thought first arrives. Notice the impulse to pick it up, polish it, enlarge it, and keep it spinning. Then ask whether this thought actually needs your labor right now. Some do. Many do not. The difference matters. The younger man found this both obvious and difficult. He was accustomed to believing every worry was urgent simply because it presented itself urgently. Yet the woman was not telling him to deny his responsibilities. She was pointing out that there is a distinction between a problem and the endless mental carrying of a problem. We could say the same about a fire. A fire looks self-sustaining when it is bright. It leaps, snaps, commands attention, but it remains alive because something keeps feeding it. Remove the wood, and the blaze changes character. It shrinks, it softens. It cannot remain a great spectacle without assistance. Many of our inner torments are like this. We think they are permanent forces of nature. Often they are habits of fueling. Have you ever been so physically tired that you suddenly could not sustain your usual worries? The issues themselves did not vanish, but the mind no longer had the resources to dramatize them. You stopped adding logs, and in that involuntary exhaustion, something close to peace appeared. Not because your life was solved, because the fire was no longer being stoked. What if we did not always need exhaustion to discover that? What if we could sometimes choose to stop adding fuel before collapse forces the lesson upon us? This is one reason simple forms of attention are so restorative. Feeling the weight of your body on a bed, listening to a fan or distant rain, noticing the rise and fall of breath. These do not solve every practical problem. That is not their purpose. Their purpose is to place attention somewhere that does not multiply itself. They give the fire no new wood. They let the current continue without requiring you to carry it. The old woman by the river said something else to the younger man before he left. "Peace is not far away," she told him. "You keep imagining it as a reward at the end of effort, but often it is underneath the effort, like the riverbed beneath the current. You are so busy with the moving water that you think movement is the whole reality." This is such a compassionate view of the mind. It assumes that beneath agitation there is not emptiness, but steadiness. Beneath the swirl of thought there is not a void, but ground. When sediment settles in a glass of cloudy water, we do not say clarity has been manufactured. We say clarity has been uncovered. The same is often true inwardly. You might test this for yourself in very small ways. When a worry arrives, see if you can distinguish its first appearance from the long train of thoughts that follows. The first appearance may be simple and even informative. "I need to remember that appointment. I should speak honestly with that person. I must set aside time for this task." Fine. Then comes the multiplication. And what if it goes badly? And what will they think? And what does it say about me? And why am I always like this? And what if this becomes everything? It is in that multiplication that energy drains away. Notice too how the body participates. Worry is not only mental. It tightens the jaw, lifts the shoulders, narrows the breath, agitates the stomach, keeps the system subtly prepared for an attack that may never come. No wonder people grow weary. They are living as if the house must remain lit and guarded all night. What happens when attention rests instead on something neutral and immediate? The body often begins to answer first. Shoulders lower. The belly releases a fraction. The face stops bracing. Breath deepens without being ordered to. This is not magic. It is simply what occurs when one more load is not lifted. There is a kind of faith involved here, but perhaps faith is not the best word because it sounds abstract. What I mean is trust in process. Trust that not every spinning thought deserves a seat at the table. Trust that the mind can quiet without being wrestled into silence. Trust that when the jar is set down, what is suspended begins to settle. Trust that the stone at the bottom of the river does not need coaching in how to be still. This trust is learned slowly. At first, many people feel that if they stop worrying, they will become careless, irresponsible, or naive. Yet most are not stopping responsibility at all. They are only stopping the theater around responsibility. They still pay the bill, have the conversation, make the call, revise the plan, but they no longer sacrifice every hour to rehearsing a future that never stays rehearsed. The more this becomes familiar, the more a person discovers that quiet is not an exotic state. It is ordinary. It is available in fragments throughout the day, in the pause before answering, in the breath after setting something down, in the moment of looking out a window without turning the sight into content, in the few seconds when a worry loses steam and nothing has yet replaced it. Those moments matter. They remind us that peace is not always something to be earned in bulk. Sometimes it is encountered in intervals. A person learns its texture in seconds before they can trust it for minutes, then perhaps for an hour, then perhaps as a background quality that remains even while life continues asking things of them. If tonight your mind feels like a bright fire, do not hate it for burning. Fires burn when they are fed. Simply notice what you have been giving it. Then perhaps, very gently, stop for a while. Let the logs remain beside the hearth. Let the river move around the stone. Let the cloudy water stand. You may be surprised by what returns when effort is no longer spending you. There is another way effort becomes heavy, and it has less to do with worry about the future than with the burden of self-consciousness. A task that was once simple becomes crowded by identity. What used to be play becomes performance. What used to be direct contact with life becomes a stage on which the imagined self tries to secure approval, safety, worth, or proof. When that happens, even beautiful work begins to feel tight in the hands. Consider how different it feels to do something when no story is attached. You wash a bowl because the bowl needs washing. You walk because the evening is cool and your legs want movement. You speak because something true needs saying. There is ease in this, not because life is effortless, but because no extra cargo is being carried. Then compare it with doing the same task while loaded with meaning. I must do this perfectly. People must notice. This must confirm who I am. If it goes badly, it says something terrible about me. The task is the same. The inner load is not. A story comes to mind. There was a young calligrapher whose work had once been loose, lively, and full of spirit. He learned as a child by sitting beside his grandfather, who ground ink slowly and laughed easily when a line came out crooked. In those early years, the boy loved the feel of the brush against paper. He liked the spread of black across white. He liked the way one movement led to the next. Sometimes the characters were elegant, sometimes awkward, but he never worried much about the difference. He was absorbed in making marks. As he grew older, people began to admire his work. A magistrate purchased one of his scrolls. A teacher praised his hand. Visitors to the town asked to see more. The young man, who had once painted with cheerful absorption, began to think of himself as someone who must produce beauty reliably. This is where the trouble started. Now, when he sat down at the table, he was not alone with ink and paper. He was joined by invisible spectators. What if the line trembles? What if this character looks weak? What if the magistrate was mistaken about me? What if the next scroll reveals that I am ordinary after all? He held the brush more carefully. He corrected himself mid-stroke. He made fewer errors, perhaps, but also fewer living lines. His work grew stiff. One afternoon, his grandfather visited the workshop. The older man watched in silence for a long time as the young calligrapher produced character after character, each one technically impressive and somehow lifeless. Finally, the grandfather said, "You are no longer writing with ink." The young man looked down at his brush. "Then with what?" "With reputation," said the old man. "With fear, with yesterday's praise and tomorrow's judgment. You have dipped the brush in many things, and now there is hardly any room left for the ink." The young man felt anger first, because the sentence went straight to the sore place. Then he felt grief, because it was true. The grandfather did not scold him. He rolled up one of the new scrolls and set it aside. "Do you remember the first characters you wrote on the floorboards with water in summer?" he asked. The young man smiled despite himself. "Of course. They vanished in minutes." "Yes," said the old man, "and because they vanished, you were free. No audience, no permanence, no need to be impressive, only motion, attention, and delight. Find that again." "But how?" asked the young man. The old man handed him a bowl of plain water instead of ink and spread practice paper on the table. "Then write where nothing needs to last," he said. For several days, that is all the young man did. He wrote with water. Each character darkened the paper for a moment and then disappeared. At first his hand was still tense. Old habits do not evaporate on command, but little by little, without the burden of producing something worthy of praise, a forgotten ease returned. His wrist loosened. His breath deepened. The characters began to move again. Later, when he returned to ink, something in his work had changed. Not because he had become careless. He was still attentive, but attentiveness was no longer fused with self-protection. The brush touched paper the way a foot touches a familiar path. His lines had life again because he had stopped trying to make every line prove he was alive. This is an exquisite teaching for anyone whose effort has become heavy. Many people are not exhausted by tasks alone. They are exhausted by the self they drag into every task. They bring comparison to dinner. They bring fear to work. They bring old beliefs to rest. They bring the question of worth into conversations that never asked for it. Naturally, everything feels overburdened. Some traditions use the image of a magnet for this. Carry a magnet through a room full of metal filings and watch what happens. You intended only to cross the room, but bits of iron leap toward you from every side. Soon your hands are crowded with things you never consciously decided to carry. In much the same way, when effort is strongly tied to identity, it attracts every old story within range: fear of failure, need for approval, memory of rejection, hunger for recognition, childhood vows about productivity, doubts about being enough. The action itself becomes sticky with meanings. This is why an ordinary task can feel strangely unbearable on some days. It is not only the task, it is the entire field of associations humming around it. The email is not just an email, it is proof of competence or incompetence. The conversation is not just a conversation, it is a referendum on lovability. The rest is not just rest, it is evidence of laziness or permission to exist. Once the magnet is active, small acts become emotionally expensive. The freedom here is not in refusing all effort, it is in noticing what has been attached to effort and beginning gently to set those attachments down. Wash the bowl as a bowl. Write the sentence as a sentence. Take the walk as a walk. Speak the truth as truth. The burden lessens when the self-story is not consulted at every turn. There is an old saying that before awakening you carry water and chop wood, and after awakening you carry water and chop wood. The tasks do not vanish. What changes is the invisible commentary. The wood is no longer chopped by a self trying to become someone through the chopping. It is just chopped. The water is no longer carried by a mind performing virtue or martyrdom or resentment. It is just carried. In that justness, there is enormous relief. You may recognize moments of this already in your own life. Perhaps when you are absorbed in music and forget to monitor yourself. Perhaps when you are cooking and your hands know the vegetables without needing a story. Perhaps when laughter takes you so completely There is no observer left inside keeping score. These moments feel fresh because the self has loosened its grip. They are not empty moments. They are unusually alive. Many people assume self-consciousness is sophistication, but often it is only heaviness. A child drawing does not stop every second to ask whether the picture proves anything. A bird does not interrupt its own singing to evaluate its future reputation. There is a reason simple beings sometimes seem closer to ease. They are not dragging a resume through the afternoon. This does not mean we become thoughtless. It means we become less burdened by constant self-reference. When a person stops using every action to negotiate identity, space opens. Not abstract spiritual space, but practical space. More breath, more spontaneity, more patience. Less resentment toward ordinary tasks. Less fragility around mistakes. More direct participation in what is actually happening. If there is a line for tonight, perhaps it is this: let the brush carry ink again. Let the act be itself. Let the moment be lighter because you are not forcing it to certify who you are. Should thoughts about self still arise? Of course, they will. The magnet has been trained for years, but each time you notice an ordinary moment loading itself with old metal filings, you can pause. You can set down one belief, one expectation, one demand. You can return to the simple contact between hand and cup, foot and floor, breath and body. That return is not small. It is one of the most restorative movements we know. There is one more habit of mind that deserves careful attention because it is so ordinary we tend to mistake it for reality itself. Thoughts arise, as natural as weather. Then we follow them. We braid one to the next, and the next to the next, until we have wandered far from the little moment in which the first thought appeared. By the time we notice, we are deep in some imagined future, old memory, private argument, or self-judging narrative, and the room we are physically in has all but vanished. This happens so quickly that many people believe the whole chain was unavoidable. But there is a difference between a thought appearing and us continuing it. The first may be spontaneous. The second is a habit. Habits, even long-standing ones, can be seen. What can be seen can loosen. Here is a story. A group of students once sat with a teacher on a rainy evening. The shutters were open just enough for cool air to enter. Water drummed on the roof in soft, irregular patterns. Every now and then a wagon rolled along the road outside, its wheels hissing through the wet. One of the students, a woman who had been trying earnestly to meditate, suddenly opened her eyes with an expression of defeat. "I cannot do this," she said. "Every sound steals me away. I hear rain, and then I think about the leak in my room, and then about the repairs I have not made, and then about money, and then about the work I should be doing to earn more, and then about the future, and then I am nowhere near the rain anymore. My mind turns one drop into a whole storm." The teacher nodded. "And what do you conclude from that?" "That I am terrible at being still," she said. The teacher smiled. "Or perhaps you are seeing for the first time how the mind travels." He asked her to listen carefully for the next passing wagon. They waited. After a few moments it came, a low rolling sound fading in from the road below, crossing the space outside, then receding. "Did you choose that sound?" he asked. "No." "Did the first recognition of it arrive on its own?" "Yes." "And what happened next?" She thought for a moment. "I think I began telling myself a story about where the wagon was going. Then I wondered who was inside it. Then I remembered something I forgot to buy in town. Then I was thinking about tomorrow." "Exactly," said the teacher. "The sound came. The first thought came. After that, you climbed aboard." The students laughed softly because everyone knew the experience. The teacher continued. "There is nothing wrong with the sound of the wagon. There is nothing wrong with the first thought either. The mind notices. That is its nature. Trouble begins when every visitor is treated as a host and given the whole house." That line stayed with the students. Every visitor is treated as a host. How often do we do exactly that? A thought knocks. "I hope this conversation goes well." Fine. Then we seat it at the table, feed it, invite its cousins, discuss old family grievances, project next year's consequences, and before long, the house is crowded with anxiety. Another thought knocks. I feel tired. Fine. Then in come the others. I should not be tired. I am falling behind. Other people manage better. Maybe something is wrong with me. Maybe this means everything is too much. Maybe I am not built for this life. A single knock becomes a banquet. The relief of this teaching lies in its modesty. It does not ask us to stop thought altogether, which would be like asking the sky to stop having clouds. It asks only that we notice the point at which we begin supplying the chain. That point may be very small, barely a breath, but it exists. We know it exists because sometimes we hear a sound, think a thought, and go no further. The mind notes it and releases it. The wagon passes. The rain continues. The thought rings once and fades. This fading can be understood with another image. Imagine a bell struck one clear time in an empty room. The sound blooms, lingers, and dissolves. Nobody needs to shove it away. Nobody needs to grab it and pull it down. It fades because that is what sounds do when they are not struck again. Thoughts are often like this. A thought arises, resonates, and if not repeatedly hit with attention, commentary, and elaboration, it diminishes on its own. But how many of us keep ringing the bell? We revisit the same sentence someone said years ago. We rehearse the same future conversation that has not yet happened. We return to the same fear, turning it in our hands from every angle, thinking we are learning something new when often we are only renewing the sound. Then we wonder why the room is noisy. This is particularly visible at night. A small concern arises. I need to remember to send that message. Harmless enough. But then comes the chain. I hope I do not forget. If I forget, it will look careless. People already think I am disorganized. Maybe that is why things have been difficult lately. Maybe I always make life harder than it needs to be. Now the body is awake, the heart a little faster, the room full of echoes from a bell that could have rung once and passed. The teacher on the rainy evening offered the students a practice so simple it nearly sounded foolish. When you notice you have boarded the wagon, he said, step off at the next stop. What does that mean in plain language? It means noticing mid-chain and returning, without drama, to something immediate. The sound of rain, the feeling of the hands, the weight of the body on the cushion, the simple fact that you are in a room and the mind has wandered into a story, nothing more. No accusation required. This is where many people become unnecessarily harsh with themselves. They discover, again and again, that the mind has wandered, and they treat each discovery as failure. But the discovery is not failure. It is awareness. In fact, it is the entire practice. Without the noticing, you remain lost. With the noticing, the spell has already weakened. Each return is an act of kindness, not because it is sentimental, but because it refuses to add blame to wandering. The mind wandered. Minds do that. Now it returns, over and over. The dignity lies not in never leaving, but in learning how to come back without violence. There is something almost humorous in how easily the mind makes staircases out of pebbles. A smell leads to a memory leads to an argument leads to a future scenario leads to fear. A simple sound leads to the review of an entire life. Once you see this clearly, you do not need to despise it. You can regard it with warmth. Ah, there goes the mind building roads again. Some teachings compare thoughts to leaves on a stream. I like that image because it preserves movement without urgency. Leaves land. Water carries them. You need not lean down and retrieve every one. You need not catalogue their shapes. You may simply watch them move past. Another image is a moth at the window. It appears, flutters briefly against the glass, then disappears into dark. Not every passing thing requires engagement. Underneath this is a larger trust. If you do not follow every thought, you do not disappear. This fear sits beneath much of our compulsive thinking. We imagine that if we stop narrating, planning, remembering, rehearsing, or interpreting, there will be nothing left but blankness. Yet what appears when thought loosens is not a void. It is immediacy, sound, sensation, space. breath, the room, the living texture of the present moment. Far from being empty, it is often richer than the story we were trapped inside. So tonight, if a chain begins, notice the first links, a sound, a thought, another thought reaching for it. Then stop at the next opening. Let the wagon continue without you. Let the bell ring once. Let the rain stay rain. Again and again. With patience, come back. The world you return to is not small. It is this astonishing, ordinary moment where your body is still being held by gravity. Your breath is still entering and leaving, and life has not demanded that you solve yourself before resting. After all of this, the waiting, the allowing, the returning, the setting down of extra fuel, there remains one teaching even gentler and more radical than the rest. It is the possibility that what you have been seeking is not merely close by. It may already be the ground of the search itself. The peace you imagine as distant may be the very awareness in which distance is being imagined. That can sound abstract at first, so let me bring it close. Most people have had the experience of searching frantically for something only to discover it was in their pocket, on their head, in their hand, or on the table in plain sight the entire time. There is always a strange mixture of embarrassment and relief. Nothing new was acquired. Nothing had to be earned. The search stopped, and what was present became visible. A story from a village comes to mind. There was a woman who owned a blue wool shawl she loved more than any other piece of clothing. It had belonged to her mother and then to her, and on cold mornings she wrapped it around herself before going out to feed the goats or sweep the front step. One winter evening, after a tiring day, she suddenly became convinced the shawl was missing. She searched the chest by the bed, the hooks by the door, the bench in the kitchen, the line outside, the cart shed, even the path between the house and the well. She turned over baskets, shook blankets, opened drawers, muttered to herself, and grew increasingly distressed. The shawl was not only useful, it represented comfort, memory, and home. The more she searched, the more upset she became. A neighbor passing by heard the commotion and called in to ask what was wrong. "My shawl is gone," the woman said. "I have looked everywhere." The neighbor stood in the doorway a moment, trying not to smile, because the blue shawl was already around the woman's shoulders. "You mean that one?" she asked. The woman reached up with both hands. For a second she simply stood there, touching the fabric. Then she laughed until tears came. The shawl had been warming her the entire time she was searching for it. There is kindness in that image, because it reveals something almost impossible for the restless mind to believe. We can be held by what we think we have lost. We can be standing inside the very peace we claim is absent, not because the mind is foolish, but because searching creates its own kind of tunnel vision. We look outward so intently that we stop noticing what is already in contact with our skin. The contemplative traditions speak about this in many forms. One says the treasure is buried under your own floor. Another says the moon reflected in water does not need to be fetched. Another says the rider spends the day looking for the animal he is already riding. Different images, same tenderness. We exhaust ourselves reaching for what has never departed. What might this mean in immediate experience? It does not mean you always feel calm. It does not mean difficult emotions vanish or that the mind stops moving. It means that beneath the changing weather of experience, there is a larger openness that has not been injured by every passing cloud. Thoughts come and go. Feelings come and go. Sensations shift. Nights vary. Seasons turn. Yet there is a simple, aware presence in which all of this is happening. That presence does not need to be manufactured. It is already here before the next thought, during the thought, and after it. One way to approach this is through the sky. The sky is not destroyed by storms. Storms occur within it. Heavy clouds do not erase it. They obscure our view of its openness, but the openness remains. In the same way, a day of anxiety does not prove that peace is absent in some absolute sense. It proves only that weather is strong. The mistake is in concluding that weather is all there is. Another way to approach it is through space in a room. Furniture can be moved, music can play, voices can argue, windows can open and shut, sunlight can angle differently across the floor. But the room's capacity to contain all this remains. Awareness is like that. It holds joy, boredom, sorrow, anticipation, tenderness, confusion, and the ceaseless movement of thought. It is not identical to each content. It is the field in which contents appear. This matters because many people believe peace is a special feeling. Then, when that feeling is absent, they assume peace itself is absent. But peace in the deepest sense is not merely a pleasant sensation. Pleasant sensations come and go like all others. Deep peace is closer to unresisting presence. It is the space that allows sensations to move without demanding that one particular sensation last forever. A young practitioner once complained to her teacher that she had spent years trying to find unwavering tranquility and had failed. The teacher asked her to sit quietly and name whatever was present without trying to change it. She named sound. She named pressure in her knees. She named irritation. She named the wish to get it right. She named a bird outside. She named breathing. Then the teacher asked, "What knows all this?" She did not understand at first. So he asked again. Sound is known. Discomfort is known. Irritation is known. The wish to succeed is known. What is this knowing itself like? She grew still because the question moved attention away from the contents and toward the fact of awareness. The bird came and went. The discomfort remained a while. Thoughts rose, but the knowing of them was already present, already open, and oddly untouched. Many people miss this because they keep looking for fireworks. They expect awakening to arrive as a dramatic event, a glorious certainty, a permanent spiritual weather pattern. But often the recognition is simple to the point of absurdity. The openness has been here all along. The shawl has been on your shoulders. The sky has been behind the clouds. The room has been spacious through every rearrangement of furniture. Search has its place. It leads us to teachers, books, practices, questions, conversations, and honest effort. None of that is wasted. Yet there comes a moment when the search itself must become transparent. Otherwise, we use practices to perpetuate the sense of lack they were meant to undo. We become experts in looking and strangers to resting. Perhaps tonight can include even a small taste of this, not as a concept, but as a shift in emphasis. A thought appears, fine. A feeling appears, fine. A memory, a plan, a tension in the jaw, the sound of traffic, the warmth of blankets, the ache of being human, the relief of being alive, all of it appears. And here, already here, is the simple knowing of all that. No strain needed, no dramatic attainment, just the obvious presence that has accompanied every moment of your life, whether you noticed it or not. If that seems too subtle, let it remain subtle. Not all truths arrive by knocking down the door. Some arrive by being noticed after years of standing quietly in the room. The woman did not need to acquire her shawl. She only needed to stop tearing the house apart long enough to feel what was already around her. So tonight, perhaps, stop searching the whole house for a few minutes. Feel what is already touching you. The bed, the air, the breath, the awareness in which these are known. Let that be enough for now. The mind may still ask questions, but questions can float in a larger quiet. You need not answer every one before resting. There is a beautiful side effect to all of this that deserves its own time. When the grip of striving loosens even a little, the world becomes vivid again. Not because the world has changed dramatically, but because you are no longer approaching it only through utility, memory, or anticipation. Things recover their texture. A child knows this naturally. A child can spend 10 full minutes observing the movement of ants along a crack in the ground. A child can crouch over a puddle as if it were an entire universe. Adults often pass by the same puddle while checking messages, revising tomorrow, and mentally arguing with a person who is not present. Then we say adulthood is simply more realistic, perhaps, but it is also more distracted. There is maturity in planning and responsibility, yes. But there is another maturity that consists in seeing freshly without needing novelty. This is not childishness. It is freedom from overfamiliarity, to look at what is ordinary and discover that ordinary does not mean dead. Think of how quickly labels flatten experience. We say tree and stop seeing. We say spouse, neighbor, co-worker, routine, neighborhood, body, self, and feel we understand enough to move on. Yet the label is often a thin convenience draped over a vast living fact. The tree outside your window this evening is not merely tree. It is that exact arrangement of bark, branch, shadow, insect, memory, season, and weather at this hour of your one life. The person you have known for years is not the summary file you carry in your head. They are changing in real time, meeting this day with an interior you cannot fully predict. Even your own face in the mirror is not a static object. It is the current expression of years, sleep, worry, kindness, weather, and time. When we relate primarily to labels, life thins. We move through a museum of names, but when presence returns, the named world becomes alive again. We notice the steam rising from a cup, the exact tone of evening light on a wall, the fact that one breath is cooler as it enters and warmer as it leaves, the specific tiredness in the thighs after walking, the way the floor supports the feet without asking anything in return. None of this is exotic. It is simply unnoticed when the mind is busy elsewhere. A woman once told me that after months of feeling lost in worry, she stood one morning in her kitchen waiting for a kettle to boil, and for no particular reason looked closely at the orange she was about to peel. She noticed the tiny dimples in the skin, the weight of it in her hand, the fragrance released by the first tear in the peel. Suddenly she began to cry, not from sadness exactly, but from the shock of contact. She realized how long she had been living near her life instead of inside it. This is one reason contemplative practice often returns to simple acts: walking, breathing, eating, washing, listening. The mind says, surely peace must be hidden somewhere more impressive. But often the impressive search is what keeps us estranged from the ordinary miracle underfoot. We wait for thunder and overlook sunlight on a table. There is another gift hidden here. When we see freshly, gratitude stops being a moral obligation and becomes a spontaneous response. Not gratitude as performance, not the forced exercise of listing blessings while secretly resenting the exercise, but gratitude as astonishment that anything is here at all. Water on the tongue, a clean shirt, the sound of a familiar voice, the absurd faithfulness of breath, the body's willingness to carry us through day after day even when the mind has been unkind to it. Fresh seeing also softens loneliness in a strange way, not because it gives us instant companionship, but because the world regains intimacy. The room is no longer background. Air is not background. Night sounds are not background. The self no longer stands in such hard separation from everything it contacts. There is participation again. You can practice this without making it into another achievement. Choose one ordinary thing and let it be less ordinary than your mind's category suggests. The next cup you hold, the next door you open, the next face you look at, the next breath. Not because you are trying to become profoundly mindful all at once, but because you are tired of sleepwalking past what is here. In the Zen tradition, there is a phrase often translated as beginner's mind. I like to think of it as the willingness not to know too quickly. When we think we already know, curiosity closes, possibility narrows, encounter becomes memory. Beginner's mind does not erase skill or experience. It simply refuses to let knowledge become a lid. In the beginner's mind, the evening is not a repeat of yesterday's evening. The same room is not the same room because you are not exactly yesterday's you. The body is not the same body. The weather is not the same weather. Even this thought, this breath, this tiredness is unrepeatable. There is poignancy in that, and tenderness. Nothing can be mass-produced at the level of real experience. Perhaps this is why slowing down can feel unexpectedly moving. When the rush eases, impermanence becomes visible in a loving way. The child's face is changing. The season is changing. The body is changing. The evening is already passing. Far from being depressing, this can make contact more precious. We hold the cup and actually feel the cup because the moment cannot be stored. If you have felt dull lately, overscheduled, far from yourself, perhaps freshness is not waiting in some dramatic reinvention. Perhaps it waits in direct contact with what has become invisible through repetition. You do not necessarily need a different life to feel alive. Sometimes you need less distance from the life you already have. So let the next few moments be enough. Hear whatever sounds are present without turning them into commentary. Feel the place where your body meets the surface beneath it. Notice the quality of the air. These are not scraps of experience. They are the living fabric of being here. And when they are met directly, the heart often remembers a quiet delight that had been covered, not destroyed. There is a paradox most people discover sooner or later. The harder they try to produce certain inner qualities directly, the further away those qualities seem to move. The person who tries desperately to be calm notices only more agitation. The person who tries to force confidence becomes preoccupied with insecurity. The person who orders the mind not to think discovers that thought has suddenly become the loudest thing in the room. This can feel cruel until we understand the pattern. Many states of being are not captured by grabbing at them. They are more like birds that land when the yard becomes quiet. They are more like reflections visible only when the water is not being slapped by the hands. Trying has its place, but there is a threshold beyond which trying begins to advertise the very absence we hope to fix. A teacher once illustrated this with a story about archery. There was a young archer who had exceptional aim when he practiced alone in the field near his home. He could strike hanging gourds at a distance, split reed targets, and send arrows cleanly between two posts without touching either side. Yet whenever he entered a formal contest, everything changed. His hands stiffened, his breath shortened, the bow felt strange in his grip. His arrows, once alive and responsive, went wild. After a particularly humiliating performance, he went to see an older buyer who had crafted bows for decades and was known to understand not only wood and string, but the people who used them. "I do not understand it," the young archer said. "When no one is watching, I know how to shoot, but in front of others I lose everything." The buyer asked him to demonstrate. So they went behind the workshop where several straw circles stood against a bank of earth. The young man lifted the bow and sent arrow after arrow into the target cleanly. "Good," said the buyer. "Now imagine that if you miss, the people in the village will say you were never talented at all." The young man frowned, then drew and released. The arrow landed low. "Imagine," said the buyer, "that someone you admire is watching from the doorway and deciding whether you are worthy of respect." The next arrow went wide. "Imagine that your future depends on this one shot, that your value as a person hangs from the string with it." This time the young man's hands trembled before he even released. The buyer nodded. "You still know how to shoot," he said, "but you are no longer shooting at the target. You are shooting at your fear." Then the buyer placed an empty cup on a fence post and said, "Draw the bow without aiming to hit anything." The young man looked confused, but obeyed. "Again," said the buyer, "but this time feel your feet. Feel the pull in the bow. Feel the breath leaving as the string releases. Forget the cup." Again, again. After a while the young man's shoulders softened. "Now," said the buyer, "let the arrow go where the movement goes. Do not send it to prove anything." The arrow flew and struck the fence post just below the cup. Not perfect, but freer. For several weeks the buyer had him practice this way. Sometimes he shot at leaves already falling, sometimes into empty space, sometimes at targets, but only after long periods of drawing and releasing without trying to demonstrate skill. The archer began to rediscover something he had lost, the directness of action before self-consciousness crowded it. When the next contest came, he still felt nervous. Of course he did. But he also knew something new. He knew that the extra burden was optional. He could feel the fear without handing the bow to it. He could let the body perform what it had learned without requiring each shot to settle the question of who he was. This story is not really about archery. It is about every situation in which the mind inserts self-evaluation into an act that would be cleaner without it. Public speaking, parenting, working, resting, even trying to be spiritual. The moment the act becomes a referendum on worth, the body tightens and the natural intelligence of the act is obscured. The same thing happens with confidence. Many people think confidence is achieved by mentally inflating themselves, by repeating assurances, by trying to extinguish every trace of doubt. But often the most grounded confidence arises not from pushing doubt away, but from no longer organizing the whole moment around doubt. Confidence is what remains when excessive self-monitoring eases. The body understands this sometimes before the mind does. Have you ever done something well by accident because you forgot to be self-conscious? Maybe you spoke honestly because there was no time to construct a better image of yourself. Maybe you danced because music carried you and the internal observer was temporarily absent. Maybe you fell asleep the moment you stopped trying to sleep. These moments reveal something important. Ease is not always produced. Sometimes it is uncovered when pressure drops. There is an ancient phrase about action without strain. It does not mean laziness. It means action so aligned with reality that it is no longer clogged by inner commentary. The cook cutting vegetables while simply cutting vegetables. The swimmer moving with water instead of against every current. The speaker saying the needed words without simultaneously trying to manage every possible impression. This is not a trick. It cannot be faked by adopting a relaxed pose while inwardly gripping harder. It comes from sincerity, from caring about the act itself more than the self-image attached to the act, from returning again and again to direct contact. Feet on the ground, hand on the bowl, breath in the body, eyes on what is actually before you. One reason sleep is such a tender example is that it humiliates control. You cannot dominate your way into sleep. You can prepare. Dim the light. Lie down. Let the body lengthen. Stop consulting the clock. But the final crossing happens when the effort to cross has relaxed enough. The mind that keeps yelling from the shore does not board the boat. Similarly, calm rarely appears because we glare at ourselves and command calm. It appears when enough inner movement has stopped amplifying itself. Confidence rarely appears because we argue ourselves into certainty. It appears when the act no longer carries the full burden of identity. Rest rarely appears because we win a debate with fatigue. It appears when we stop treating rest as something to deserve after impossible standards are met. If tonight you notice yourself trying hard to enter some ideal state, trying to become perfectly peaceful, perfectly present, perfectly released, see if you can soften even around that. The attempt itself may be the tight knot. You do not need to perform serenity. You only need less interference. The archer still used effort. He stood well. He trained. He learned the craft. But when the arrow left the bow most truly, it was not propelled by panic about the self. It was carried by a simpler intelligence. Your life contains moments like this already. You know more than you think about how to let the arrow go. By this point, perhaps you can feel how many of these teachings circle the same place from different directions. Wait without prying. Allow without abandoning. Return without scolding. Stop feeding the fire. Let the act be itself. Discover what is already here. All of them point toward a profound but ordinary possibility. That rest is not merely the absence of work. It is the body and mind returning to their own center after being pulled outward all day. Every evening this return tries to happen. You can almost feel it in the last hour before sleep. The body grows heavier in a pleasant way. The eyes begin to lose interest in distance. Sounds soften at the edges. The mind, if it is not endlessly recruited into one more task, begins to loosen its grip on the day. This is not laziness. It is a homecoming process built into the organism itself. Yet many people resist the homecoming. They carry the day into night, as if setting it down would be irresponsible. Conversations continue in the head. Future scenarios line up at the door. Old judgments are reheated. The body lies down, but does not arrive. There is a story about an old porter in a market town. All his life he had carried bundles for merchants from wagons to shops and from shops to homes. He was strong in the back and shoulders, and people trusted him because he never dropped a load. One winter, a younger man was hired to help him. The younger man worked hard but was miserable. By the end of each day, his whole body ached and his temper was frayed. He complained that the work was breaking him. The old porter watched for a while before speaking. At dusk, he asked the younger man, "When do you stop carrying?" "When the carts are empty," said the younger man. "No," said the old porter. "You stop carrying when the load leaves your body. I have watched you. You set the bundle down with your hands, but not with your shoulders. You keep holding it after it is gone." The younger man laughed, thinking it was only a figure of speech, but the porter stepped behind him and touched his upper back, which remained raised and rigid even while they stood in the empty lane. Then he touched the jaw, tight, the belly, braced. The younger man had indeed continued carrying nothing at all. The porter taught him a small ritual. At the end of each delivery, after the bundle left his hands, he was to stand still for one breath and feel the weight no longer there. Not as a mental exercise, as a bodily fact. The shoulders would lower, the hands would open, the spine would lengthen again. At first it seemed silly, but within weeks the younger man understood. He had not been exhausted only by labor. He had been exhausted by failing to stop labor when labor ended. How many of us do that with our days? The conversation ends, but we keep carrying it. The task is completed, but we keep hauling its meaning around. The email was sent hours ago, yet the body behaves as if it is still being drafted. The difficulty belongs to yesterday, but the shoulders do not know that because the mind has brought it back into the room. Night asks for a different kind of intelligence, not the intelligence that plans and solves, but the intelligence that lays down. Birds fold their wings, shops darken, windows become mirrors. Even the city, if you listen closely, has rhythms of exhale. The body belongs to this larger pattern of release. It is not designed to remain internally upright under every load, every hour. One of the kindest things you can do tonight is let the body feel what is no longer in your hands. Let the hands themselves soften. Let the tongue unclench from the roof of the mouth. Let the forehead stop trying to figure out the entire shape of tomorrow. None of this prevents action when action is needed. It simply returns unnecessary effort to the earth. There is something deeply moving about the body when it begins to trust that it may stop. Limbs grow pleasantly heavy. The muscles around the eyes ease. Breathing becomes less supervised. A warmth may spread through the chest or belly. Not emotional exactly, not even dramatic, just the warmth of an organism no longer preparing for the next demand. Many people are so accustomed to vigilance that this simple softening feels almost unfamiliar, even vulnerable. But vulnerability here is not danger. It is surrendering borrowed weight. If you notice resistance to laying down the day, be gentle with that too. Some people learned early that vigilance was necessary. Some built identities around being capable, available, always on. Some are afraid that if they release tonight, tomorrow will punish them. There is compassion needed here. Let the system learn by degrees that rest is not collapse, and that setting a burden down for a few hours does not make one faithless. A useful question is this: what am I still carrying that is not actually in my hands? Perhaps a conversation, an image of yourself, a fear of what may happen, a problem whose next wise step cannot be taken tonight anyway. Name it if you like, then feel whether the body is willing, even slightly, to stop gripping around it. The old porter would say, "Leave the bundle where the bundle belongs." The lane does not need you to keep pretending it is on your back. There is profound mercy in that. The day has been what it has been. Some things were done, some were not. Some words landed well, some did not. Some questions remain unanswered. But night is not improved by dragging everything onto the mattress. Night asks only that we enter it more honestly, tired if tired, sad if sad, uncertain if uncertain, still willing to be held. So feel, if you can, the place where your body is no longer responsible for holding itself up alone. The chair, the bed, the floor, whatever receives you. Gravity is doing a quiet share of the work. Let it. The world is full of supports we ignore because we are busy supporting an extra fiction of total control. Rest is not always a grand transformation. Sometimes it is one shoulder lowering a fraction, one long exhale, one thought not followed, one remembered fact. I am allowed to stop carrying what is not currently in my hands. There is a phrase that can sound almost scandalous to the hard-working mind. Nothing to do. It can be misunderstood in a second. People hear resignation, passivity, refusal, laziness, indifference. But that is not what the phrase points toward at all. It points toward those moments when the essential work of life is already underway and additional interference only makes things noisier. Nothing to do does not mean bills never need paying, food never needs cooking, apologies never need offering, injustices never need answering. It means that in this exact moment of resting, there may be no further inner labor required beyond being here. Breath is happening, gravity is happening, night is happening. The body's repairs are happening. Awareness is already open. There may be nothing extra for the mind to construct. A story may help. On a rocky coast, there lived an old keeper of a small beacon. His work was simple and repetitive. At dusk, he checked the lamp, cleaned the glass, and made sure the path down to the shore remained clear. Fishermen coming home after dark watched for that light. The keeper took his responsibility seriously, but he did not confuse responsibility with constant fussing. A younger man apprenticed with him one season and was eager to be useful. Each evening after the lamp was lit, the young man paced. He checked the flame again and again. He adjusted the wick, cleaned a spotless pane, peered into the distance to see whether the boats were approaching, worried about wind, worried about fog, worried about whether he had worried enough. The old keeper watched this for several nights before speaking. Once the lamp is lit and the glass is clear, he said, "What are you doing?" "Making sure," said the younger man. "Making sure of what?" "That the light works." The old keeper nodded toward the dark water where the beam already moved in steady arcs. "It is working," he said. "Your pacing is not making it brighter. But what if something changes?" "Then we will respond when it changes," said the old keeper. "Until then, stand still long enough to see that the work is being done." This is such a useful image for the inner life. We light the lamp by creating good conditions. We rest the body. We speak truth where truth is needed. We make amends. We breathe. We stop feeding unnecessary fires. We notice thoughts and return. Then often the mind keeps pacing anyway, not because more work exists, but because it has not learned the dignity of completion. One of the reasons spiritual teachings can become burdensome is that people turn them into new pacing. They monitor their peace. They evaluate their meditation. They compare their inner weather to someone else's imagined weather. They turn every quiet moment into a test. But the point is not to become impressive in stillness. The point is to cease inventing extra labor. If the beacon is lit, let it shine. If the body is resting, let it rest. If the breath is moving, let it move. If thoughts are passing and you are not boarding each one, let them pass. That may be enough. In fact, that may be everything needed for this moment. The younger keeper eventually learned something else from the old man. Some nights were clear. Some came in with sea mist so thick the beam seemed to disappear almost as soon as it left the glass. At first, the younger man panicked on those foggy nights, assuming the light had become useless. The old keeper would only say, "Keep the lamp steady. Boats find their way by more than sight alone, and fog has its own limits. Peace is like that too. There are clear nights and foggy ones. Some evenings the mind settles easily. Some evenings it remains full of vapor. The teaching is not, make every night clear. The teaching is, keep the lamp tended. Do not confuse temporary obscurity with failure of the light. Nothing to do may therefore mean something very gentle. Nothing further to add. No extra commentary. No additional tightening. No frantic inspection. Life is not waiting for you to become a supervisor of your own heartbeat. It is already happening. This can be a tremendous relief for people who have spent years trying to improve every second of themselves. It suggests that the path may contain many moments of subtraction rather than acquisition. Fewer stories, not more. Less gripping, not more certainty. Less management, not more control. More trust in the simple intelligence already operating beneath conscious effort. The old keeper would sometimes sit on the bluff after the lamp was lit and listen to the sea. The younger man once asked what he was doing. Waiting, the old man said. For what? For nothing in particular. For the night to be the night. At first the younger man thought this was merely old age speaking. Later he understood it differently. The old keeper was not wasting time. He was participating in a world that did not require constant improvement to be itself. There is a place in every human being that remembers this. It remembers what it is to sit under a tree and not turn the hour into a transaction, to watch evening gather without trying to capture it, to lie down and let darkness be dark, to feel the breath enter and leave without asking the next breath to justify the last one. If the phrase "nothing to do" frightens you, perhaps translate it more softly. Nothing to fix right now. Nothing to prove right now. Nothing to solve with thought right now. The next wise action, if one is needed, can arise later. But here, in the quiet chamber of this night, perhaps your only task is to stop manufacturing tasks. That itself is not a small thing. It is a restoration of proportion. It is the tired mind being told, with kindness, you may put your tools down. Not forever, just long enough to remember that existence continues beautifully even when you are not rearranging it. If we gathered everything from this evening and set it on a table, what would be there? A hillside waiting for bloom without being bullied into color. Seeds under dark soil, not needing to be inspected every hour. A chick strengthening itself against its shell. A restless woman learning not to keep reopening the place that is trying to close. A traveler discovering that the song he sought in the mountains had followed him on the road. A river stone unmoved beneath racing water. A calligrapher putting down the burden of reputation. A wagon of thoughts passing in rain. A shawl already wrapped around searching shoulders. A porter finally realizing that he keeps carrying loads after they have left his hands. A beacon already lit while the young apprentice paces around it. Different scenes. One, tenderness. The tenderness is this. Much of our suffering comes not from life alone, but from our refusal to let life move in the ways it already knows. We hurry what needs season. We pry at what needs darkness. We overhelp what needs its own effort. We overthink what would fade. We grip identity around simple tasks. We search outside for what is already in contact with us. We carry weights that are no longer present. We pace after the lamp is lit. Seeing this is not cause for shame. It is a form of relief, because if strain has been added, strain can sometimes be reduced. If noise has been amplified, amplification can stop. If heaviness has been extra, extra can be put down. There is also humility in it. Life is older than our strategies. Your body knew how to mend a cut before you learned language. The heart learned rhythms before you ever worried about doing things correctly. Night has been carrying creatures into rest long before anyone wrote a book about rest. The world is full of processes that neither need nor welcome our constant supervision. This does not make us irrelevant, far from it. Our care matters. Intention matters. Honest effort matters. But our role is not total. We are participants, not tyrants. Gardeners, not manufacturers of spring. Tenders of the lamp, not inventors of light. Witnesses to the unfolding, not masters of time. Maybe one reason this is so moving is that many people are tired beyond the point of knowing how tired they are. They are tired of holding themselves together around every expectation, tired of narrating the future, tired of trying to become acceptable to an invisible jury, tired of carrying unresolved things long after sunset, tired of treating every inner ripple as a crisis and every outer demand as proof they must not stop. So let this be said plainly. You are allowed to stop adding, allowed to stop for this night with whatever is unfinished, still unfinished, allowed to be a breathing person rather than a perpetual project, allowed to let the larger currents of life carry some part of what you have been dragging alone. If tears come when hearing that, let tears come. Sometimes the deepest sign of truth is not agreement in the mind, but softening in the body. The body recognizes mercy before concepts do. It knows the difference between being managed and being held. And perhaps this is the deepest movement of tonight, not toward mastery, but toward being held. Held by the mattress, the chair, the floor. Held by air entering and leaving on its own. Held by gravity, that patient, invisible companion. Held by darkness, which covers without asking us to earn coverage. Held by awareness itself, spacious enough for every thought that rises and every thought that falls. When people hear the words already home, they sometimes imagine a final state in which all questions end permanently. Perhaps something quieter is meant. Home may not be the elimination of all weather. It may be the recognition that weather is passing through a place large enough to hold it. Home may be the roominess in which sadness can visit without taking over the title deed. Home may be the body returning to itself, one breath at a time. Home may be the unforced knowing that this moment does not need to be different before you are allowed to inhabit it. If so, then home has been available in fragments all along. In the pause after a long exhale. In the instant you notice rain instead of the story about rain. In the second your shoulders drop because you remember the load is not on you now. In the moment a thought is seen as a thought and not as a command. In the surprising warmth of a room you had mentally abandoned. In the simple fact of lying here and not needing to become anyone else before the night receives you. You do not have to keep all these ideas in mind. That would only be one more bundle. Let the details go if they want to go. The hillside will still teach. The seed will still teach. The bell, the river, the shawl, the lamp. They will keep teaching because they point to patterns older than explanation. Perhaps all you need to remember is one thing. Maybe the one thing is stop lifting the soil. Or maybe it is do not keep striking the bell. Or maybe the light is already on. Or perhaps simply set the bundle down. It does not matter which doorway opens. They lead inward toward the same quiet room. In that room, nothing dramatic has to happen. You do not have to feel transported. You do not have to certify that peace has arrived. You do not have to report on your progress. You only have to let this moment be more intimate than your thoughts about it. That intimacy is enough, more than enough. It is where life becomes real again. As the night deepens, you might sense how everything in nature leans toward this kind of simplicity. Trees are not discussing whether they deserve winter rest. The moon does not apologize for waxing and waning. Streams do not second-guess their way around stones. Even the animal body knows to curl, to nest, to lower, to release. Our minds often complicate what our deeper nature already understands, but understanding can be remembered, not forced, remembered. So remember slowly, remember with the body, remember by not doing one extra thing, remember by letting the jaw soften, remember by allowing the eyes to rest behind closed lids, remember by trusting the breath enough not to supervise it, remember by noticing that awareness is still here even when you stop producing commentary. Nothing is missing from this moment that must be acquired before rest begins. The search can ease. The house can grow quiet. The lamp can burn without your pacing. The bundles can remain where you set them. The road can stop for the night. Now, for the remainder of this evening, let us come even closer, not to ideas, but to immediate experience. Whatever stories have been told, whatever images have passed through the mind, all of them are only useful if they help you settle more honestly into the life that is here right now. Right now there are sounds, perhaps a heater, a distant car, wind against glass, the faint settling of a building, the low hum of electricity, or the strange almost silence that rooms can carry late at night. These sounds are not interruptions to rest. They are part of the field of rest. They are the ordinary music of a world continuing without asking anything special of you. Right now there are sensations, places of contact where your body meets what holds it, weight in the hips or shoulders, warmth under blankets, or coolness on exposed skin. Maybe a little tension somewhere still. Maybe comfort in some parts and discomfort in others. Let it all be included. You do not need an immaculate body to rest. You only need a body willing to be felt without argument. Right now, breath is happening. It may be shallow or deep, smooth or uneven, spacious or a little caught. That does not matter as much as the simple fact that it is moving. Breath has been with you through every confusion, every joy, every ordinary Tuesday, every illness, every recovery, every grief, every celebration. It does not demand applause. It does not need a plan. It keeps arriving, and tonight you can let it arrive without interference. If it helps, feel just one exhale all the way through. Not improve it, not stretch it. Only notice how the body releases a little on the way out. Then let the next inhale come by itself. There is an old comfort in discovering that some of the most important motions in your life are not managed by the anxious mind. Your breath does not need to be earned. Your heartbeat does not require a meeting. Digestion, repair, circulation, dreaming, cellular work in darkness, these continue whether or not you stand over them with a clipboard. This is one reason surrender can be such a healing word when we understand it properly. Not surrender as defeat, not surrender to harm, not surrender of intelligence or responsibility, but surrender of unnecessary control. Surrender of the frantic posture that assumes everything meaningful will cease if we stop pushing for an hour. You can let life carry its own weight for a while. It has been carrying much of it already. Notice whether there is still some part of you keeping watch. Many people have a small sentinel in them, always alert, always evaluating. Has anything changed yet? Am I doing this correctly? Should I be more relaxed by now? Will I be tired tomorrow? These questions are natural. They are not enemies, but they do not need answers tonight. They can remain like distant lanterns on a far shore while you stay where you are. The practice now is beautifully small. Let one thing be simple. Let the next breath be the next breath. Let the next sound be only sound. Let the next moment of contact between body and bed be only contact. We are taking the mind off management duty and allowing it to relearn companionship instead, to accompany life instead of policing it. Sometimes at this point, people notice the mind wander more, not less. That is fine. When outer activity quiets, inner noise can seem louder for a while. It is like entering a room after machinery has been shut off and discovering all the small sounds that were there underneath. Do not treat this as sit back. Nothing has gone wrong. You are simply hearing what was already operating. Let the sounds continue. Let the thoughts continue if they insist. You do not have to board each one. The room does not become less quiet because a train passes in the distance. You may even notice old memories or old moods drifting through. Perhaps the day is still unwinding. Perhaps something deeper is asking for a little acknowledgement before sleep. If so, acknowledgement may be enough. Yes, that happened. Yes, this feeling is here. Yes, I know. No need to build the whole staircase. No need to ring the bell again. No need to solve the entire life tonight. There is a tenderness in trusting the dark. Seeds trust it. Animals trust it. Even the body, in its own way, trusts it. Healing often happens there. Not always in the dramatic sense we like to imagine, but in the quiet cellular, hormonal, nervous system sense. Tissues mend. Memory sorts itself. The overstimulated brain gradually lowers its volume. The immune system continues its patient work. Muscles receive the message that they are no longer required to brace against everything. So much is restored when the lights go down and the supervisor goes home. Perhaps that is an image worth keeping for a moment. The supervisor going home, the foreman who has been telling every thought where to stand, every feeling what it means, every tomorrow how it must unfold. Let that figure take the night off. The crew of life knows its tasks better than you think. If your body is willing, you might feel the face soften, not by force, just by withdrawing the extra effort that has been living there. The small effort around the eyes, the little tension across the forehead, the pressure in the mouth. There can be enormous relief in discovering how much concentration has been stored in the face all day without being needed anymore. Then perhaps the throat, the shoulders, the hands, the belly. Again, no command, only invitation. If a place remains tense, let it remain tense without making that tension a failure. Some knots do not untie because we glare at them. They loosen in warmth, patience, and time. If you find yourself wanting evidence that this is working, smile gently at that wish. It is such a human wish. The mind wants a report, a certificate, a graph showing improvement. But this evening is not a performance review. You are not here to earn a passing grade in rest. You are here to be a living creature in the dark, nothing more and nothing less. And if sleep comes, good. If sleep does not come immediately, that too can be held differently. Lying down in kindness is not wasted time. Resting without war is not failure. Sometimes the most healing shift happens before sleep itself. The shift from battling wakefulness to allowing wakefulness to be quieter. Once struggle lessens, sleep often stops being so far away. But even before that, the body benefits from the ceasefire. Imagine, for a moment, a field after harvest. The work is done for the season. Stubble remains. The soil is not empty, it is recovering. Birds move through it. Frost will come, then thaw. Under what seems bare, countless processes continue. So it is with you. Even if tonight feels unremarkable, even if the mind is not fully silent, even if some parts of you still feel unfinished, quiet work goes on underneath. Not your work alone, life's work. This is why the old metaphors endure. The bud opening when warmed, the root strengthening underground, the water clearing when not stirred. They endure because human beings keep forgetting and needing to remember that not everything valuable comes through pressure. You may have spent years living as if safety depended on vigilance. If so, let this night be gentle with that history. We are not ripping vigilance away. We are thanking it and loosening it. We are telling the nervous system, as many times as needed, that this hour does not require battle stations, that the walls are not under siege. That being undefended for a while is not the same as being unprotected. A child who has been frightened does not relax because someone lectures them on the virtues of relaxation. They relax when conditions begin to feel trustworthy. In much the same way, the body softens not because it is intellectually convinced, but because enough cues of safety arrive. A slower voice, dimmer light, warmth, steady breathing, not being hurried, not being judged for being tired, not being told to become something other than what it is. Offer yourself those cues tonight as best you can. And if the mind continues making a little weather, let it. We do not have to win a contest against clouds. We only have to stop insisting that clouds erase the sky. The sky has room. You have room. More room than the mind often believes. There is something almost sacred in how ordinary this all is. No special incense, no mountain cave, no thunderclap of wisdom required. Just this room, this night, this body, this breath, this simple opportunity to stop pushing. The simplicity can be humbling. We search for grand entrances, and the doorway is here all along, plain as wood, open as air. Let a few more things be simple. The weight of your legs, the warmth at the center of the palms, if there is any, the movement of breath where it is easiest to notice, the exact darkness behind the eyelids, the passing of a thought without the necessity of following, the possibility that this very ordinary moment is enough to hold you. You do not have to become invisible to your thoughts. You do not have to be a master of serenity. You do not have to silence every internal voice. It is enough to cease giving each one the full authority of truth. Let them be weather passing over open land. If some final problem presents itself with great urgency, you might quietly say, "Not now." Not because the problem is unreal, because this is not the hour for construction. Morning can receive what belongs to morning. Night is for lowering the tools. And maybe, just maybe, there is relief in realizing that nothing essential is being neglected by this lowering. The lamp still shines. The body still breathes. The earth still turns. The future has not been solved, but it never was by midnight thinking anyway. The day behind you has not been rewritten, but it never was by replay either. What remains possible now is simpler and kinder. Rest. So rest if you can. If you cannot quite rest yet, then rest from striving to rest. Let that be enough for the next few breaths. The doorway does not mind how slowly you enter. We are nearing the close of this long, quiet walk together, and perhaps that is the right moment to remember that nothing we have spoken about tonight needs to be turned into one more demand. You do not need to remember every story. You do not need to organize the teachings into a perfect structure. You do not need to wake tomorrow and perform some improved version of yourself because you listened well. If anything from this evening matters, it will matter in the way rain matters to soil. It will sink by itself. The ground does not memorize each drop. It receives, and something green appears later. Let that be enough. Let the hillside with its late bloom remain somewhere in you if it wants to remain. Let the seed under the earth remain. Let the chick working against its shell remain. Let the traveler hearing music in leaves and river remain. Let the river stone, the bell, the shawl on the shoulders, the beacon on the coast, the porter lowering his bundle, the calligrapher returning to water, the archer forgetting to aim at his fear. Let any of them remain if they are useful, and let them all go if they are not. The deeper truth does not depend on the survival of the images. The images only point. And what do they point toward? Toward the astonishing possibility that the peace we long for may be less like a destination and more like a recognition, less like a prize and more like a homecoming, less like something constructed from strain and more like something revealed when strain stops occupying every room. Human beings often imagine that the answer must be hidden in complexity because our suffering can feel so intricate. We have long histories, layered memories, contradictory desires, responsibilities, fears, tendernesses, habits, wounds, and hopes. We can think in loops for hours and call it realism. So when a simple truth appears, rest now, soften now, stop adding now, be here now. It may seem almost insulting in its simplicity. Surely it cannot be that plain. Yet some of the deepest realities are plain. Water settles when left alone. A hand unclenches by ceasing to clench. A burden becomes lighter when set down. A room is entered by entering it. The present moment is inhabited not by understanding it exhaustively, but by ceasing to abandon it. What if that is enough for one night? Not enough for all of life, perhaps. Not enough to erase every complexity, but enough for one true night of not leaving yourself. You may have spent years searching in many directions, searching through achievement, through explanations, through relationships, through habits of improvement, habits of distraction, habits of endurance, searching in thought, in books, in future plans, in the fantasy of becoming someone more worthy of rest than the person who lies here now. None of that search makes you foolish. Search is part of the human path. It has dignity. It has courage. It brings us to thresholds we might not otherwise reach. But every search worth making eventually introduces the possibility of stopping. Not because the searcher has become lazy, but because the search has done its work and can finally hand us back to what was nearest from the beginning. The whole path circles home. Home may not look the way you expected. It may not blaze. It may not speak in trumpets. It may arrive as a nearly imperceptible settling in the chest, as shoulders lowering, as a thought not pursued, as the simple realization that, for this one breath, nothing more is required. It may arrive as tears, or laughter, or no emotion at all. Just quiet. The mind often overlooks quiet because quiet does not advertise, but quiet has been waiting longer than noise. If you sense even a small amount of that quiet tonight, do not seize it. Let it be small. Let it be ordinary. We damage many good things by trying to enlarge them too quickly. Let the quiet be exactly its own size. If it wishes, it will widen. If it does not widen tonight, that too is fine. The point was never to collect an experience. The point was to stop standing in the way of experience. There is a kind of humility in releasing the fantasy of control. The fantasy says, if I think hard enough, feel correctly enough, optimize thoroughly enough, I will finally secure myself against uncertainty. But uncertainty is not a personal defect. It is woven into being alive. The peace worth trusting is therefore not the peace of guaranteed outcomes. It is the peace of not needing guaranteed outcomes before allowing the heart to rest. This peace is sturdy. It can exist in the same room as unfinished business, in the same body as tenderness, in the same life as grief, complexity, and change. It is not fragile because it does not depend on every wave flattening at once. It is more like the depth of water beneath the surface chop, or the broadness of sky holding all its weather, or the dark, fertile earth under a field that looks bare in winter. When people realize this, something often softens around their own humanity. They stop requiring themselves to be impeccable in order to be welcome in their own presence. They stop treating each wandering thought as treason. They stop demanding permanent calm from a living nervous system. They stop measuring every season by visible blossom. They begin slowly to offer themselves the sort of patience they would have offered a friend all along. That matters because so much exhaustion comes not merely from life, but from the quality of company we keep with ourselves while life unfolds. If the inner company is critical, hurried, suspicious, and impossible to satisfy, then even good fortune can feel tense. If the inner company becomes kinder, life remains life, still unpredictable, still mixed, but there is a new spaciousness within it. A person can breathe there. Tonight perhaps you have tasted a little of that better company, a voice that says, no rush, a presence that says, yes, you are tired, yes, things are unfinished, yes, the mind still makes noise, and still, you may lie down, still, you may breathe, still, you may be held. This voice is not sentimental, it is accurate. It sees reality and does not weaponize it. If you fall asleep soon, let sleep take you as naturally as a tide takes a leaf already on the water. If you remain awake for a while, let wakefulness be gentler than it has been on other nights. Feel the difference between being awake and fighting being awake. One is a condition, the other is labor. You can keep the condition and set down the labor. Maybe there is also room now for a small gratitude, not forced gratitude, just the faint recognition that for all the noise in a human life, there remains a way back. Back to breath, back to the room, back to the body, back to awareness, back to the ordinary earth under the feet or under the bed. We are never as far from home as the mind sometimes insists. Even in confusion, the breath continues. Even in sorrow, the sky does not disappear. Even in anxious thought, awareness is present enough to know the anxious thought. Even in fatigue, the body still reaches for rest. Life continues extending invitations beneath the conversation of the mind. This is why so many traditions speak with such tenderness at the threshold of sleep. Sleep is not only biological necessity, it is also daily surrender. Every night, we practice releasing the day, releasing control, releasing identity, releasing continuity of effort. We trust the dark to return us in the morning. What courage that is, though we rarely name it. What faith in life's underlying reliability. So let the dark be kind tonight. Let it be a place where seeds work unseen. Let it be a place where thoughts can dissolve without being chased. Let it be a place where the body is no longer asked to hold the entire sky on its shoulders. Let it be a place where the old searcher in you sits down at last on the porch, beside the lamp, and discovers that what was longed for is not approaching from a distance. It is here in the stillness already surrounding the chair, and if tomorrow brings effort, let tomorrow bring effort. You will meet it then. You are not being asked to renounce action forever. You are only being invited to stop dragging tomorrow into this breath. Morning has its own intelligence. Tonight has another. Confusing them robs both. The intelligence of tonight is softness, darkness, inclusion, downward movement, less speech, less reaching, fewer conclusions, more trust in what continues without constant instruction, more trust in the fact that life at its deepest is not asking you to manufacture your worth before lying down. You are allowed to rest as you are, not as you might be after one more year of progress, not as you might be after solving every old ache, not as you might be when every relationship is clear and every decision resolved and every insecurity retired, as you are, breathing now, feeling now, human now, held now. Perhaps that is the whole blessing, and perhaps this is the place where all searching can pause, not in triumph, not in dramatic enlightenment, but in the humble recognition that this breath is real, this body is real, this moment is real, and nothing more distant is required for a little peace to begin. If you need a final image, let it be a small house at the edge of evening. The door is open, a lamp burns inside. The room is simple, the air is cool. You arrive dusty, overfull, carrying the road in your muscles and too many thoughts in your mind. No one asks you to explain yourself at the threshold. No one hands you a test. No one says you may enter only when you have perfected your life. The room is already prepared. A chair waits. Warmth waits. Quiet waits. You step in. You set the bundle down. The lamp does not interrogate you. It simply shines. That house is not far away. It is not hidden in another country of experience. It is very near. Perhaps it is this breath. Perhaps it is the awareness receiving this breath. Perhaps it is the body finally believed when it says enough for today. However you understand it, let yourself enter. Sit down inwardly. Leave the road by the door. Let the hands empty. Let the face soften. Let the jaw unfasten. Let the eyes rest. Let the thoughts pass like late travelers on a distant road. Let the lamp burn. Let the room hold you. Let the night be night. And if words are needed no longer, then no more words are needed. The rest can happen in quiet. You are here. This is enough. Stay as long as you need. Then drift when you are ready. Nothing essential is missing. Nothing important is running away. What you need most may already be nearer than thought. So rest close. Rest simply. Rest without performing rest. Rest as a field rests under frost. Rest as water rests when wind drops. Rest as an animal curls into straw. Rest as earth rests under stars. Rest as someone who does not have to travel any farther tonight. The dark will keep watch for a while. The breath will keep moving. The body will keep doing its old wise work. And in the quiet, beneath the final soft weather of thought, peace will not need to be summoned. It will be what remains. And because this evening has been long, let us end not abruptly, but with a few final turns of the lantern, just enough to see where we are before the path disappears into sleep. There is a habit in human beings of thinking that only dramatic moments count. We remember the crisis, the achievement, the heartbreak, the breakthrough, the public turning point, the conversation that changed a life. But much of a life is actually made from quieter moments than these. The way a person sits after bad news, the way someone exhales before answering, the pause in a kitchen before dawn, the first softness in a face that has been tense all week, the decision not to continue an argument inwardly, the willingness to let a thought pass without making it law, the hour when no great insight arrives, and yet, somehow, kindness remains. These moments rarely announce themselves, but they shape us. Tonight may be one of those quiet moments, not a summit, not a victory march, just an hour in which some unnecessary tightness loosens, some old reflex was seen with compassion, some burden slipped from the shoulder without needing a speech. That matters. It matters because the nervous system learns from repetition, but it also learns from exception. Every time you let yourself rest differently, even for a few breaths, a new memory is laid down. The body begins to know that another way exists. This is why gentleness is not a luxury. It is training. It teaches the system by experience that not every thought must be chased, not every feeling must be solved immediately, not every night must become a tribunal about the future. Little by little, the organism believes what argument alone could never persuade it of. A horse that has been startled many times does not calm because someone explains calmness in elegant words. It calms when the hand on its neck remains steady, when the ground under its hooves proves reliable, when no sudden blow follows the quiet. We are not so different. The deepest parts of us trust by living through trustable moments. So perhaps this hour has not only been comforting, perhaps it has been instructional in the most basic way. Here is a room where nothing is demanded. Here is an evening in which not every question is answered. Here is a body allowed to be tired. Here is a mind allowed to wander and return without punishment. Here is breath moving without supervision. Here is enough. Enough is such an underestimated word. The striving mind hears it as defeat, but enough is not defeat. Enough is proportion restored. Enough is the point at which one more log does not make the fire wiser. Enough is the point at which one more explanation does not heal the relationship. Enough is the point at which one more inward prod does not help the wound. Enough is the point at which the day no longer belongs in your hands. If you can feel even a little of enough tonight, trust it. Trust the way a tired animal trusts the ground it has finally chosen. Trust the way a boat trusts the harbor after weather. Trust the way a seed trusts darkness without seeing the spring to come. Trust the way your own body has trusted sleep thousands of times before without requiring a contract. There may still be thoughts that say, but what about tomorrow? But what about that conversation? But what about the money, the work, the family, the future, the old ache, the unfinished plan? Let those questions exist without becoming the whole sky. Tomorrow will arrive with its own light. Morning has a different honesty than midnight. Many problems that look enormous in the dark change shape after rest. Some remain, yes, but then you meet them with a nervous system that has not been grinding its gears all night. There is wisdom in refusing to use your most exhausted hour as the courtroom in which all of life is judged. If you wake in the middle of the night later, perhaps some of these images will return to you. Perhaps you will remember the river stone, or the beacon, or the porter. Perhaps only one sentence will remain. Whatever remains, let it be simple. A thought is just a thought. The bundle is not in my hands. The lamp is already lit. The road can wait until morning. Any one of these is enough to soften the next breath. And if nothing at all remains, that is also all right. The soil does not keep notes on the rain. It receives and changes anyway. You do not need to remember this evening perfectly in order for it to have been good for you. Sometimes the most merciful understanding arrives when words have already done their work. They carry you to the threshold and then become unnecessary. Beyond that threshold, the real teacher is silence. Not a blank silence, not an empty, indifferent silence, but the living silence in which the heater hums, the house settles, the lungs move, and awareness remains open without effort. A silence that does not need to impress. A silence that can hold the whole complicated person you are and not ask you to be less complicated in order to belong. So if you are still listening, listen now not only to these words but also around them, the space in which they appear, the space after they end. The fact that even without language, you would still be here, still breathing, still held, still capable of letting one more thought go by untouched. That may be the gentlest truth of all. Peace is not a speech. It does not depend on perfect phrasing. It is not carried to you by language so much as pointed out by it. Once seen, even dimly, it continues without commentary. And now there is very little left to say. The night has its own work. The body has its own work. The hidden roots and quiet cells and deep animal rhythms have their own work. You have done enough for one evening simply by arriving here and not insisting on more. Let that be the closing. No grand finale. No demand to remember. No pressure to transform. Only the invitation to remain close to what is already present until sleep, if it comes, takes over from there. The lamp is low. The room is quiet. The threshold has been crossed. Stay softly. Drift easily if drift comes. And if it takes time, Let time be time. You do not need to travel beyond this moment to be met. You are already being met by the chair, the bed, the dark, the breath, the still open field of awareness itself. Nothing else is required tonight.